Hello and welcome ProITians. So now we have seen the various database options that Microsoft Azure provides, right? I mean, we started off with Cosmos DB, right? Then we actually learned about SQL DB, and then we moved on to learn about Azure MySQL database, and then we concluded with Azure PostgreSQL database, right? So we have all these various database options available with Azure, right? Now, what if you want to utilize this service and you are using some sort of a database in-house, right? And you want to utilize all the benefits that Azure provides on the cloud. So what are the options? I mean, does Azure provide any service which can help you in the migration? Well, the answer is yes. And yes, so Azure provides a database migration service. So what it does, it's actually a fully managed service by Azure, Microsoft Azure, and it helps in migrating your database from any known database sources to Azure database. I mean, any of those four options which we named, like Cosmos DB, SQL DB, MySQL, or Postgres, right? So we can utilize the data migration service to migrate any of your in-house database to Azure cloud, right? And you can perform these actions online and offline, right? So we are going to have a very short video, some couple of slides to run through this and see how we can utilize this service and how we can make sure when we are doing the database migration, it will be successful, right? We're going to check in this session, right? Before we move on, I would actually urge you to please subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon so that you can be notified as soon as I upload a new video, right? Great. And also, if you're liking the videos, please do give me a thumbs up. That actually keeps me motivating to post new videos, right? And also, if you have any comments, feel free to post them. And if there's any suggestions that you want, please feel free to post them. I'll come back to you with the appropriate answer, okay? And also, you can go ahead and share the content with any of your friends and colleagues, because the motive is we should be sharing the information to everyone possible. I mean, be it a fresher in this industry, be it a person who wants to learn Azure, it should be free, right? I mean, we are using a social platform, right? I mean, YouTube is on a social platform, right? So we should be using that, and we should be passing on this sort of information to our friends and colleagues and to our team members who wants to learn Azure, right? I mean, this will help in making your team stronger in a technology, right? Great. Then I'll see you in the session. Thank you. Welcome back to ProIT. So let's begin with our session on database migration service, right? So we have learned about the various database options that Azure provides. Now let's look at the various things about data migration service. So Azure Database Migration Service is a tool that helps you simplify, guide, and automate your database migration to Azure. It easily can migrate your data, schema, and objects from multiple sources to the cloud at scale. It's fully managed service designed to enable seamless migration from multiple data sources to Azure cloud, and it is designed to support different migration scenarios for both offline, that is for one time that you want to do, and online, that is continuous sync migration. All right. Now let's see what the database migration service offers. So database sensitive migration moves your data, schema, and objects to Azure. It is easy to understand process, helps you get the job done right for the first time. You only need to make sure that you have got all your ports and all your prereqs in place, and it will be very easy to do the migration. We are going to cover about the prerequisites in the coming slides. But for now, just make sure, just to note that it's very easy to understand process. It supports Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, PostgreSQL, MongoDB, and Oracle migration to Azure from on-premises and other clouds. Yeah? Its highly resilient and self-healing migration service provides reliable outcomes with near zero downtime. Alright, now let's look about the prereqs, because we have to do the migration to cloud, to Azure database, right? So let's look at the prereqs. Now, these prereqs are divided into the specific, which is required, which will be like common, and then in the coming slides we are going to talk about the prerequisites for Azure SQL database or Azure SQL instance. So we're going to look at all those things in a moment, but for now let's start with the prereqs that are required for which will be common. Okay, so let's start. So for this to happen, you have to make sure you create an Azure account, and then you have your Azure virtual network for Azure Database Migration Service by using the Azure Resource Manager deployment model, which actually provides site-to-site connectivity to your on-premise source servers by either using ExpressRoute or VPN. Ensure that your virtual network NSG, that is part of your virtual machine, right? The network security groups, don't block the ports such as 443, 53, 9354, 445, and 1200, because these are the ports that are required for the migration activities. When using a firewall appliance in front of your source databases, you will need to add firewall rules to allow Azure Database Migration Service to access a source database for migration. Right? So you'll have to configure your firewall, Windows Firewall for database engine access. Right? Enable the TCP/IP protocol, which is disabled by default when you're going to install the SQL Server Express edition. Alright, now let's look at the Database Migration Service prerequisite for migrating SQL Server to Azure SQL Database. So in addition to Azure Database Migration Service prerequisites that are common to all migration scenarios, there are also prerequisites that apply specifically to one scenario or another, right? So when you're using a database migration service to perform SQL Server to Azure SQL database migration, then in addition to the prerequisites that are common, which we covered in the earlier slide, we need to have a more additional prerequisites are required in that. So for that, we need to create an instance of Azure SQL database instance. Then you need to download and install Data Migration Assistant version 3.3 or later. Open your Windows Firewall to allow the Azure Database Migration Service to access the source SQL Server, which is by default TCP port 1433. And if you're running multiple SQL Server instances using dynamic ports, then you may wish to enable the SQL browser service and allow access to UDP port 1434 through your firewall, so that Azure Database Migration Service may connect to the name instance on your source server. Create a server level firewall rule for SQL database to allow the Azure Database Migration Service to the target databases, and you need to provide the subnet range of the virtual network used for the Azure Database Migration Service. Last but not the least, you have to ensure that the credentials used to connect to SQL Server instance have control server permissions, and also ensure that the credentials used to connect to the target database have control database permissions on the target database. Alright, now let's move to the last one, that is Data Migration Service prerequisites for migrating SQL Server to Azure SQL Managed Instance. Alright, so for this you need to create a SQL Managed Instance in the cloud, and then you need to open your firewall to allow SMB traffic on port 445 for the Azure Database Migration Service IP address or subnet range. Open your firewall, Windows Firewall, to allow the Azure Database Migration Service to access the source SQL Server, which is by default port TCP port 1433. And if you're running multiple named SQL Server instances using dynamic ports, then you may wish to enable SQL browser service and allow access to UDP port 1434 through your firewall, so that Azure Database Migration Service can connect to a named instance on your source server. Ensure that the logins used to connect to the source SQL server and target managed instance are members of the sysadmin server role. Then you need to create a network share for that, so that Azure Database Migration Service can use to back up your source database. Ensure that the service account running the source SQL Server instance has write privilege on the network share that you created, and the computer account for the source server has read-write access to the same share. And make a note of your Windows user that has full control privilege on the network share that you've previously created. Microsoft Azure Database Migration Service impersonates the user credentials to upload the backup files to Azure storage container. And last but not the least, create a blob container that retrieves its SaaS URI, and be sure to select all permissions, that is read, write, delete list on the policy window while creating the SaaS URI. Alright. Now here are the few of the links which you can use to study more about these migration service and about the other components of Azure. Alright, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please do click on the subscribe icon, and if you're liking them, please do click on the thumbs icon. Alright, great. Until next time, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.